Okay, well, our next speaker is Carmen Krogh, and she's a very rare thing, and she's here because she's a very rare thing, which is to say, she is that proverbial citizen, a real member of the grassroots, unaligned, I don't think partisan, who takes up a brief with passion and proceeds to tilt against the windmills. This is Carmen Krogh. Thank you for coming, Carmen.
Hello, everyone. I'll make sure my slides display. Whoops. Should be back. So I'm going to explore some headlines about wind turbines with the subtext that wind turbines can harm human health. Now, some find that a provocative statement, but these are not my words. An environmental review, here, I'm having some problems. All right. That's because clickers have a problem with me. Clickers and I don't always work well. So anyway, this was an environmental review tribunal that heard witness statements, qualified experts from around the world, 26 of them. And this was a wind turbine case, one of the first appeals in Ontario for an approval of a wind turbine project. And the tribunal, one of its findings was that it wasn't whether or not wind turbines could harm. They found that, yes, it can harm humans, and that's if facilities are too close to residents. Now, the distances still have not been determined, which could avoid this kind of harm, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a bit. They also concluded the debate was about what they called the degree, which could be setbacks or the level of harm that could be experienced by some. This is definitely an international topic, and you'll notice that my slides are referenced. That's my background in health. We usually reference what we can. And sometimes I put emphasis on points just to draw the audience's attention to it. So a little bit about commonly reported symptoms. Dr. Pierpont documented these symptoms back in 2009. She studied and researched a number of people from different countries. And you will hear these very commonly expressed by people. Number one typically tends to be sleep problems, different types of pressure in the ear, the chest. Different phenomena occur with people, headaches. Some people get vertigo. It's getting more common with the increased size of wind turbines now. Some people have cognitive problems, and what we call a fight or flight sensation that can occur sometimes in a home. So these are quite commonly described no matter what the national language of a country is. And I work internationally, have translators, doesn't matter if it's in Japan or Germany, that type of these sets of symptoms are often described. Now, I'd like to tell you how I got involved with this. A lot of people want to know. It was totally by accident. In fact, I started this back in the fall of 2008. And I thought I would be finished early 2009, and I'm still at it. So we were given a flyer in our mailbox, my husband and I, in a zone where we don't have threats of turbines, but there was a project proposed, and we thought it was a terrific idea. But because I'm used to researching things, I decided out of curiosity to understand a bit more about wind turbines. And to my surprise, I found a number of reports coming out of Europe, Germany, different countries, of people reporting health issues. So that inspired me to get involved a little bit more. And I received a call in early January 2009 from a woman called Barb. And she started to describe to me what was happening to her family. Now, this was a really emotional time because I believed her, and I had a lot of concerns. that she couldn't sleep, her and her family couldn't sleep anywhere in the house. They tried different rooms, basement. They even set up the bedroom in the garage. And they had 3 sets of independent noise testing done that registered low-frequency noise in the house. They were experiencing the sleep symptoms, vibration, humming in the house that they couldn't get away from. And even with 5 turbines shut down at night, this humming, vibration, and the symptoms were relentless. So they finally decided to sleep in a tent. Oh, this really moved me. And eventually, they received a financial agreement with the developer and have relocated. Now, I believed Barb from day one, very credible woman. She next put me in touch with a group of families in another project. And I connected with a woman, Sandy. And you will notice that that slide illustrates these are the group of 5 families that were affected by sleep disturbance, similar things that Barb was describing, pressure, sensations, cardiovascular effects. Some had hypertensive crisis that resolved when they left the area. And you'll notice that this spans gender and age groups. The little child you see there couldn't sleep in the house. The doctor wouldn't let her go back. The woman taking the picture was pregnant at the time. These families were billeted at the developer's expense for some time. The family with the young child in the pregnancy, when they delivered the baby, they had been billeted for some time in a motel room, and they brought their little baby back into this motel room. So all these people were bought out and have been relocated. Now, these were very brave people to step forward in 2009 because the atmosphere was not very comfortable at that time. And I admire their courage for having done this. And I believed all the families, I've met them all, and I've continued working on this topic with other families. I have the honor and privilege to introduce you to Barb and Sandy, and I know they're in the audience, and if you guys would stand up. These are real people. So that's a little bit of background how I got involved. So I'd like to look and explore the headlines. So first I want to talk about what does a direct causal link mean? This is very significant. Some people call it the dreaded D word. I don't call it that, but the term direct has connotations in health. And back in 2010, the Ontario Chief Medical Officer of Health published a report on wind turbines. And the headline said there was no direct causal link between wind turbines and adverse health effects. This was very disappointing to many of those that I was working with at the time and researching. Best way to explain the term direct is through this noise schema. You'll see up here, I'm not good with the pointer. On the left side, high noise exposure has what we call a direct pathway, hearing loss. We don't hear really people complaining about wind turbine-induced hearing loss. However, there's an indirect pathway that's critical in health. That's with moderate noise levels. This is the World Health Noise Schema from 2009. If you look, the indirect pathway is where we see the cluster of symptoms. You'll see sleep, and over on the very far side, annoyance, that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But you'll notice the sleep, the cognitive, the stressors, they converge. Direct and indirect pathways converge. The high noise levels typically are factory noise levels where the worker is protected from that noise exposure. And you'll notice how the decision tree runs down biological effects with an endpoint of risk to cardiovascular disease. Of interest, during the Environmental Review Tribunal that I spoke about, the head, what I would call the lead author of that report, testified under oath that she agreed with the schema. She also testified that that particular report only considered the direct links. That means the important biological pathway or the indirect pathway was missed. So this is an illustration of why you need to look beyond the headlines. I want to point out that the same tribunal acknowledged that wind turbines could cause serious harm through both pathways, either direct or indirect. And they acknowledged that these were stressors that could occur. And unfortunately, that report still hasn't been updated and is still used quite a bit on this topic. I'd like to talk next about what's annoyance. I can tell you that people suffering ill health or symptoms really dislike this term because in everyday language it tends to trivialize what's happening to them. However, in terms of health, many organizations, including Health Canada, EPA, and so on, acknowledge that it's an adverse health effect. There's 50 years of research on this. It was a poor term to choose, but we're stuck with it. When you look beyond the headlines, last fall, in October, Health Canada released preliminary results of its Health Canada wind turbine noise and health study, and the headline said there was no link to health effects. The second one that I used for illustrations also said it didn't hurt people, but some people were annoyed. So when you see annoyance in terms of health, you know that the real story is it's a health effect in itself. What's interesting is that Health Canada did find some statistically significant results with annoyance. And they noted that there was shadow flicker, blinking lights, and different self-reported symptoms. As well, they found it at a 35 decibel level, and I'm going to explain that. Now, first, I wanted to show you, and I hope this works. We'll see if that one, I had a slide there showing shadow flicker, but we'll see if it works. In 2004, annoyance was shown to occur with wind turbines at 40 decibel, and it took 70 decibels for rail traffic and air noise to be annoying to that degree. So this is very significant that Health Canada has found 5 decibels less 10 years later. Aha, there's my slide. So this gives you an idea of shadow flicker and how disturbing this is for people. Some do not. This is a visual impact. Some people find that they can't go outside during certain times of day. And so when you hear that some people are disturbed by visuals, yes, in some cases they are. Okay. Now, the Council of Canadian Academies was commissioned by Health Canada to do an assessment of wind turbine noise, and they found annoyance was a clear adverse health effect. So this is a prestigious group here in Canada. And you'll notice that one of their tables proposed the possibility of a direct pathway through annoyance. So I found that interesting that we may be closing in on biological certainty. And I'll explain what that means. Now, in a moment. Something that I feel audiences should be aware of is in Canada, we have a wind technology roadmap that the Minister of Natural Resources announced about 4 or 5 years ago that it was an industry-led, government-supported initiative to include, to enhance or expand on wind energy in Canada. That's a top-down policy. And these are things that we have to be aware that policies do exist in Ontario as well. The Green Energy Act policy is really to promote the growth of green energy, and it's what we call an economic act. if you search the Green Energy Act, you won't find health in there except in the context of the rights of citizens in Ontario to appeal a project. When you're appealing the project, you have to predict the future and prove to the tribunal that that project, as it's approved, will cause serious harm to human health. Now, that's a pretty hard test. Or the other alternative, serious, irreversible harm to animals, plant life, etc. Now, what does that mean when we're talking about health for the burden of proof? Normally, a causality proof is around 95% or more scientific certainty. And we all know there's many, many conditions that we still don't know what causes it, but we avoid exposure or we treat. In this case, projects keep being approved and they're imposed without consent on residents, because the residents are appealing these and are nervous about their risks to health. Not everybody gets sick, but if even one person in the house does, you have no choice but to leave the home. And environmental protection is a prospect of harm, more likely than not, around 10 to 30%. And that's what I was raised on throughout my career, is if there was a risk and you could avoid it, then you did something about it. World Health does acknowledge that some policies either can improve or worsen health and health equity. Health Canada also has a paper they put out in 1986 saying that conflicting interests can exist between policies, and I think that's probably where we're at now. Let's look quickly. Denmark. In 1985, their energy association had illustrations 45-meter heights. That might be something what we see in Toronto, at the Toronto Centre there. But they're much more than the 143 meters now, much higher than what Denmark indicated was the standard 8 years ago. Give you an idea, I'm in touch with La Gaspésie in Quebec, and these people are suffering. These are small turbines, not very big, but you can see the growth and the scale and the size of them now. These are examples. This one is so interesting to me. I know this woman well. That turbine's a half a mile from her house, but she feels like it's coming through the top of a roof, just from the perspective of it. And sometimes it can really affect the landscape, as PEI is showing. So I'd like to wrap up quickly. I guess what I want to say, and I see I'm going to do it, I'll make it. I was trained under precaution. If we can avoid avoidable harm, I think there's sufficient evidence right now that the policies aren't working, the distances aren't working, the compliance levels aren't working, because we have too many people that can't live in their homes and do leave. I asked the MOE back in 2009 or 10, something like that, if we could have a database that captured abandoned homes. That would be an important database to try to monitor the severity of the impact. And that hasn't happened yet. But I follow the principles of World Health, where I was trained, that we don't need scientific proof all the time. If we have a threat to public health, in my practice and in my research, if someone told me that a certain drug that they took, I'm a retired pharmacist, and it really affected them badly, well, I would believe them and suggest immediately they tell their doctor to avoid any risk. And so this is where I'm at, that I think we have enough issues. I would like to see a revisit of how we site these turbines. And the secret is to put them away from people. And I thank you for your attention. I have to tell you that if I could tell myself at 16 something important, I really learned to look beyond the headlines, because they give you a snapshot, but they don't tell you the whole story. So thank you very much.
Carmen.
My pleasure.
As you can see, and I say this with enormous affection, Carmen is the opposite of slick. And,
That's for sure.
and
I'm not slick, yes,
at
for
the
sure.
same time, she's steady and she's determined. And maybe she and other people like her will be able to do something about the fact that all over this province right now, politicians and ideologues and anonymous bureaucrats and other so-called experts are imposing these things in the face of a growing amount of evidence of damage to public health and considerable individual and community opposition. We'll hear more about this, I hope, tomorrow. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you. You're wonderful.